Hey everyone, tonight we're journeying into something much more chilling. An age of pestilence, penance, and pottage. We're stripping away the romantic view of the Middle Ages. No more shining armor or grand banquets. Fact is, you would at last pass dawn. But before we dive in, if you're into this kind of deep dive, hit like and subscribe. Only if you genuinely enjoy these explorations. Then drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our worldwide squad's time zones. Now dim the lights, fire up a gentle fan for that ambient white noise, and steel yourself for this evening's odyssey. Congratulations, you've just awakened in the year 1325. First relief, you're alive. Second horror, so are the fleas. Your bed is nothing more than a half-decomposed straw bundle that once served as barn bedding. No memory foam, no plush pillows, no Egyptian cotton, only a coarse wool blanket, unwashed since the previous winter, now as heavy as a lamb weighed down by grime. You stir as the distant church bells toll, a medieval alarm clock that spares nothing. Your home is a single-room wooden hut with no glass in its openings, where your family, a handful of goats, and various crawling critters all share the same space. You attempt to stretch and instantly regret it. The morning air is bone-chilling, your muscles stiffen, and your joints crack like brittle timbers. At 22, you're considered past your prime by medieval standards. Your spine groans like an aging drawbridge, your knees pop like stones in a mill. Exiting this makeshift bed is a gamble. The dirt floor may be slick with rain seeping through the thatched roof, or crusted with your neighbor's chicken droppings. Either way, your bare feet become part of a less than pleasant ecosystem. Privacy? A myth. You share every inch of this one-room structure with your immediate family, and that cousin who never quite moved out. No partitions, no curtains, just communal existence. Welcome to dawn in medieval Europe. You're never alone, not with fleas, rodents, and half a dozen relatives always within arm's reach. Having extricated yourself from your hay-bound tomb, another primal urge emerges, nature's call, and it's anything but polite. Modern conveniences are centuries away. There's no porcelain throne, no manufactured seat, no roll of paper, just a wooden bucket hidden behind the hut, likely already overflowing thanks to Uncle Stan's ill-advised turnip supper. The aroma is apocalyptic. You hold your breath, squat, and then, for the grand finale, hurl the contents into the street. Yes, directly onto the thoroughfare. Tradition demands you shout, "Garde-le!" Old French for, "Watch below!" But no one ever heeds the warning. Medieval streets double as open sewers, a stagnant canal of human waste, animal droppings, and God knows what lurking beneath your sandals. If you're among the fortunate few in a larger town with a communal latrine, congratulations, you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with perfect strangers in a wooden outhouse where ventilation is a cruel joke. Small talk is mandatory, deep breaths are strictly forbidden. Toilet paper? Pure fantasy. And that, dear viewers, is just the breakfast course. Over the next few minutes, we'll wade through the markets choked with plague rats, sample the culinary delights of gruel and rancid cheese, learn the art of bartering with medieval coinage that's been chewed and spit on, and marvel at the hygienic marvels available to the nobility, which you will not experience. Expect more aching bones, societal taboos, and existential dread. If you thought mornings were rough, buckle up. Today's itinerary only spirals downward from here. Thanks for joining this tour of historical horrors. Drop another comment with your survival score so far, and stay tuned for part 2, where we explore public punishment and the art of pretending you're not entirely terrified to exist in 1325. Most people cleanse themselves with straw, leaves, rags, or if they're feeling particularly lavish, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why no one invented handshakes back then. And if you happen to live in a castle, you'd think it'd be any better, right? Well, kind of. You might have access to a garderobe, a simple wooden bench with a hole that drops straight into the moat. Brilliant, except enemies know this, and yes, on occasion invaders have shimmed down the garderobe shaft to surprise their hosts. Whether you're a serf or a baron, medieval bathroom breaks are a public humiliation ceremony. It's freezing, it's exposed, it's risky, and always revolting. One misstep on a slick flagstone could leave you face first in yesterday's refuse. And don't even think about freshening your breath. You still haven't brushed your teeth. Survive that ordeal and you've earned a medal, or at least breakfast. You're dreaming of eggs Benedict or a steaming cappuccino? Snap back to reality. This is medieval Europe. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim ritual. No espresso machines whirring to life. No toast with avocado mash. Instead, you squat by the hearth with a wooden bowl of pottage that looks like it was scraped off a boot's sole. Pottage is the day's staple, a gloopy stew of whatever root vegetables, grains, or beans remain from yesterday. That same pot has been on the fire for days, maybe weeks, accepting fresh slops of ingredients atop the old. It's less a planned recipe and more a never-ending culinary science experiment. On the side, a chunk of bread so rock-hard it doubles as a weapon. Made from coarse rye or barley, often stretched with sawdust, crushed acorns, or other fillers because pure wheat is a nobleman's luxury. This loaf demands negotiation rather than slicing. And liquid refreshment? Don't expect orange juice or oat milk. You'll be nursing a mug of weak ale at dawn. Why beer? Because unboiled water is basically a soup of parasites and who knows what. Even children sip this low-alcohol brew. Nobody's thrilled. Fancy a bit of cheese or bacon? Think again. Meat and dairy are reserved for feast days or if your lord is feeling generous, which is seldom. Most peasants glimpse meat only a handful of times per year. Fresh fruit appears only in season, and often already turned into wine. Spices? Only royalty can afford a pinch of pepper, which costs more than your monthly wage. Salt is so prized it's locked up. So you gnaw your gritty bread, nurse your soggy pottage, and try not to dwell on the possibility that a rat snuck into that pot overnight. Breakfast doesn't invigorate you. It merely sustains the will to keep going. And now, undernourished as ever, it's time to move on to the day's labor. Because without work, you'd starve. Next up, dressing. You own exactly one outfit. That's it. A coarse wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn daily for months, maybe years. Seasonal wardrobes don't exist. You wear it until it falls apart or until you develop some fungal nightmare. Underclothes are optional. If you're fortunate, a thin linen undertunic. If not, you go commando beneath layers of itchy, sweat-stained wool, all crudely stitched by someone who never heard of seam allowances. Laundry? Ha! No machines, no soap, no dry cleaners. Your only choices are haul river water, heat it over the fire, scrub with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which appears about 3 days a year. Otherwise, your garments remain stiff, stained, and fragrant with a compost-like aroma. Shoes, if you possess them, are flimsy leather affairs barely held together by crude stitching and offer support equivalent to a banana peel. Most villagers simply go barefoot through mud, dung, and hidden medieval landmines, sharp stones, shards of pottery. All this wear and tear on your body yields one inescapable fact: your skin despises you. You scratch incessantly as fleas, lice, and bedbugs treat your flesh as a free rental property. Everyone suffers from it: noble lords in their velvet cloaks, so-called holy monks, squirming children, and yes, even your favorite livestock. No one escapes the endless itch. Picture yourself leaning over the wash basin, prodding at an angry patch under your arm with a wooden spoon, all while politely greeting the parish priest. He says nothing. It's just another Wednesday. Your skin, rubbed to raw, screams at every touch. Your scalp has become ground zero for a microscopic war, and if a rash blooms, you're out of luck. There are no healers who specialize in skin, no soothing salves, no doctor to whisper scabies. Instead, you endure each maddening tingle in stoic silence. Or you'd think so, if you could stop scratching long enough to notice. And if you dodge infection, that rash will cling to you for half a year, like a meddlesome companion you never asked for. Clad in those scratchy garments and buzzing with insects, you squint at the world beyond your hut. Smiling feels like a folly. Your grin would scare small children. Oral hygiene is a myth. There's no toothbrush, no minty paste, no swish of mouthwash, no flossing rituals under candlelight. Bathing itself is whispered about like a scandal, and teeth stand little chance of surviving the grime. Some clever souls chew on aromatic twigs or rinse with sour wine, but mostly your molars fend for themselves, and badly. By your mid-20s, your once proud grin resembles the jaws of a long-dead corpse. Gaping holes of decay, swollen gums, coffee-dark stains that don't wash away. Those aren't mere food marks. They're cavities feasting on enamel. Peasant or noble, there's no escaping this. The wealthy may accelerate the process with sugar brought from distant lands, tiny cakes at lavish banquets, but you'll rot your teeth in slow motion, one fermented crust at a time. Toothaches become your constant companions, nagging, throbbing reminders that life is fleeting. You toy with the idea of prayer, clutching your jaw in church, or simply resort to pliers borrowed from the blacksmith. Yes, the same barber who trimmed your hair by torchlight will yank your aching tooth with an iron hook, zero anesthesia guaranteed. Infected, and fever may rise, creeping toward your spine. Sepsis, they call it now, back then just a death sentence you never saw coming. Once you've steeled your nerve against tooth agony, it's time to embrace real labor, the daily grind that shapes every peasant's fate. There is no ivory tower or cushioned pew reserved for you, only the Lord's fields. You rise with dawn's faint glow, and toil until twilight bleeds into the horizon. Your tools? A jagged iron sickle with a splintered handle, a stout wooden hoe you've dubbed Old Faithful, and a back that already protests after the first hour. You plow, sow seed, pull weeds, and haul water from the well, feeling each breath grow more labored as the sun climbs. There's no clock to mark respite, just the angle of shadows stretching across the furrows. Monday through Saturday you labor. Sunday, theoretically a day of rest, but if the harvest demands, if raiders raid or your neighbor's barn burns, there's no sermon to soothe your aching muscles. If you happen to be a woman, your dawn doesn't pause at field's edge. You shoulder newborns, tend to a century's worth of laundry on a washboard, churn butter, bake unending loaves, feed chickens, swaddle infants, and mend your husband's tattered hose, possibly still infested with those same lice you banished from your scalp at dawn. You stoke the hearth, churn curds into cheese, and spin wool into thread, all while keeping an eye on the ever-growing to-do list that never shrinks. So here you stand, clad in a wardrobe of well-worn humiliation, bedeviled by insects, dental decay, and unending toil, yet somehow alive. Each sunrise brings the same symphony of discomfort, each sunset the faint promise of brief respite. Tomorrow, the cycle repeats, more itching, more aching, more labor. Children begin their apprenticeship in misery as soon as they can toddle, around age 5. There's no classroom, no wooden hoop to chase, only a pint-sized rake and the faint hope that this winter's flu won't claim another nursemaid. If you're lucky enough not to be yoked to the plow, perhaps you've inherited your father's forge, a tannery vat, or a cooper's workshop. Congratulations. You still spend dawn to dusk elbow-deep in scorching coals, pungent chemicals, or slick animal innards inside buildings so airless they could suffocate a ghost. Your wages? Enough barley gruel to keep a heartbeat going. Perks? Splinters, burns, broken bones, the occasional black eye. Catch a fever, slap your own back, gulp tepid ale, and return to the anvil, because even a single day's absence means your neighbor takes your place. In medieval Europe, your profession is less a calling and more a 6-day trial by fire. With your back screaming from yesterday's toil, let's discuss the skies above. Here, seasons aren't gentle transitions but elemental punishments. Winter arrives unannounced, bearing no insulation, no chimneys, no storm windows, only timber walls riddled with cracks you could thread a goose through. Your sole garment is a damp wool tunic that smells of mildew and sweat. Beneath it, frost creeps into your bones. A handful of logs in the hearth offers little succor because wood is gold, and poaching it from a lord's forest can earn you a hanging. You huddle beside smoldering embers, praying the chill will ease, yet dawn finds your nose numb, your toes ink-black with cold, and your fingers so stiff you can't strike a match to light the hearth again. There's no remedy, just a whispered curse under frosted breath. Bad luck! When summer finally crashes in, you're not celebrating. Your hut transforms into a brick oven, no shutters, no screen doors, no deodorant, and certainly no fans. Layers of wool and linen cling to every inch of your skin, but to shed them would invite scandal, sunburn, and the churchyard gossip. Swarms of flies descend, drawn by the sour stench of last week's goat ragout fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes drill buzzing holes in your earlobes as you try, and fail, to sleep through the cacophony of infants wailing, roosters crowing, and neighbors bickering. Outside, the fields bake under a merciless sun. Without straw hats or sunscreen, your scalp crisps like roast meat, and heat stroke is merely taking a bad turn. You press on, sweat-soaked and breathless, until dusk grants a fleeting, sticky reprieve. No matter the season, nothing changes. Your tunic still itches, your porridge still tastes of ashes, and the next sunrise looms with the promise of fresh torment. Climate control? A luxury of dreams. Parched yet desperate, you might dare splash water on your face. But even that small comfort is treacherous. The nearest stream bubbles crystal clear, until you remember Uncle Yoris's chamber pot plunged upstream yesterday, or the stray pig that crumpled into its depths last week. Each sip brims with invisible armies of parasites, bacteria, and medieval horrors. Thus, adults and children alike clutch wooden mugs of small beer, at dawn, weak in alcohol, potent in survival, because boiling the mash kills more monsters than any prayer. Those with coin may swill wine, but doing so before midday guarantees a staggering stumble into neighbors' doorways. At this point you may wonder if it's worth it. Yet dawn will come, and you, worm-ridden, malnourished, and bone-tired, will rise to swing your hoe or hammer another glowing ingot. For in this realm of dirt, drip sweat, and endless chores, endurance is the only currency that matters. Welcome to medieval life, where childhood is labor, weather is torture, water is poison, and mere survival is the grandest achievement of all. What about bathing? You'd think medieval folk would scrub themselves clean, but in reality, washing was feared as a sure invitation for illness. The prevailing wisdom held that hot water opened your pores and let in every miasma and malady of the world. So, the filth layered on your skin was actually considered a protective armor. Public bathhouses did spring up, wooden tubs and heated pools where villagers gathered, but they quickly became infamous as hotbeds of scandal, gossip, and late-night rendezvous that made even the bishops blush. Before long, the church stepped in and shuttered most of them. Even if you dared to bathe, it was an epic ordeal. First, you lugged buckets up from the village well, no easy hand pumps back then coaxed them to boil over a meager fire. Next, you filled a leaky wooden barrel that splashed more water on the floor than in your tub. You'd cross your fingers that no one else in the household claimed the bath first, or worse, used it afterward to wash the pigs. Rainwater barrels offered free water, but one look at the slimy green surface, alive with insects and bird droppings, was usually enough to send you running for the ale barrel instead. In the Middle Ages, water wasn't a life source, it was a gamble. One bad sip or dab, and you'd spend your last days sweating through a straw mattress, clutching your belly and wondering where it all went wrong. Next up, medicine, or rather, the art of surviving the cure. No modern diagnoses here. Every ache, rash, or cough was blamed on an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your body was a cauldron of these mysterious substances, and when they tipped out of harmony, chaos ensued. Fever? Too much blood. The remedy? Bloodletting. Picture a barber surgeon with a crooked blade, or a gaggle of leeches draining your life into a pewter bowl. It was the same fellow who trimmed your hair by torchlight, now doubling as the village phlebotomist. 2 for 1, indeed. Feeling melancholic? That was black bile, the medieval equivalent of the blues. The prescription, a heaping dose of laxatives or a steaming herbal purge, plus prayers from a priest muttering last rites just in case you didn't make it through. Bone break or deep wound? You entered the realm of knife and fire surgery. No anesthesia beyond the bliss of unconsciousness, and instruments so unclean they could have carried crusaders' plague back home. Surgeons heated their blades over flames, not to sterilize, but to intimidate. Germ theory? A distant dream. Instead, they blamed bad air, or divine displeasure. A stomachache? Proof of sinful thoughts. You'd confess your moral failings while vomiting into a chamber pot held by a quaking apprentice. If by some miracle you survived barber surgeons, leeches, and crushed beetle poultices, the village sang your praises, crediting your recovery to divine grace and the skills of your local healer. The victorious leech, however, did not go unnoticed. After a day spent fending off bathhouse bands, humor-hunting barbers, and bloodthirsty leeches, you've earned a supper break, if there is any comfort left. You shuffle back to your one-room hut, bones aching, skin crawling, and clothes still damp with filth. Tonight's feast is a wooden bowl of thin gruel, salvaged from yesterday's pot, perhaps with a stray carrot, or, if fortune smiles, a crust of salty cheese. You cradle a chipped mug of lukewarm ale, the one luxury you never outgrow. As embers die low in the hearth and the children finally drift to sleep, you give thanks for another day's end. Tomorrow the cycle begins anew, the same miasma, the same mud-caked lanes, the same fickle water, the same knife-edge cures, and the same stubborn hope that one day you might draw a breath free of fear and grime. Until then, you cling to the promise of dawn, and to the stubborn resilience that kept your ancestors alive through every bathless, bloodletting, back-breaking era before. Your evening repast might be plotting your demise. Preservation? Virtually non-existent. No iceboxes, no cellars, just salt curing, smoky pits, or the frigid breath of autumn hoping to hold decay at bay. That slab of pork hanging in the smokehouse has been dangling for days, swarmed by buzzing flies, steeped in brine so salty it stings your nose, and likely canvassed by opportunistic rats. Bread is the cornerstone of survival, and the source of nightmares. In lean years, desperate hands knead in bark shavings, sawdust, or even clay to stretch the dough. And when rye flour is tainted with ergot, you're feasting on a hallucinogenic poison that sparks convulsions, maddening visions, and sometimes a grisly end. It's like sharing your supper with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables arrive only when they choose, cabbages in spring, onions in summer, but one crop dominates every season: turnips. Boiled, roasted, or submerged in the communal pottage pot, those bland tubers are the peasants' only constant. Pottage, if you recall, is a murky stew bubbling with mystery ingredients passed down from your great-grandfather's era. Fruit flickers briefly in autumn, windfall apples that brown overnight, and pears that ferment into vinegar before your eyes. Sugar is a fairy tale rarity, hoarded by nobles to flaunt their wealth and rot their teeth. Dairy is another roll of the dice. Unpasteurized milk sours within hours, butter hardens into rancid lumps, and cheese forms a living colony of bacteria. You eat it anyway. Anything is preferable to gnawing on your boot leather. As for seasoning, peppercorns and cinnamon sticks are treasure more precious than silver. Most peasants coax flavor from wild onions, a pinch of salt if they're fortunate, and a dash of desperation. Meals taste of damp burlap and sorrow, but hunger drowns out the misery. Food carries political weight, too. The game in the forest belongs to your lord. A rogue hare in your pot could earn you a noose or a purse-lightening fine. Your dinner might literally hang you. Yet you brave each spoonful, because in medieval Europe, eating is an act of both defiance and necessity. Night descends, but rest does not. Above you looms the ever-watchful gaze of God, the vigilant priest, and gossiping Agnes next door, each ready to mark your soul if you dare skip Mass. Religion isn't a part of life, it is life itself. The Church dictates your toil and your festival days, your schooling, if you're privileged enough to learn letters, and every threshold from cradle to coffin. Think of the clergy as landlords of the spirit, and you're eternally indebted. Your day ticks away to the tolling of bells at dawn, noon, and dusk, each peal a summons to bow your head. Miss a prayer? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Daydream of your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And don't forget, hell's promise is painted in fire and brimstone, rivers of flame, boiling blood lakes, horned demons twisting sinners on red-hot racks. The Bible remains locked in Latin, its sacred verses decoded only by monks and priests. When your crops fail or your child falls ill, the cleric's word is law. Blame your lack of devout kneeling, and kneel harder. Because in this world, salvation is earned by endurance of every perilous bite, every sacrilegious thought, and every step on the winding path between damnation and grace. Tithes, a full tenth of everything you own, aren't optional. You sow a field of wheat? You deliver a tenth of the harvest to the church granary. Raise chickens? You hand over a tenth of the eggs. Own nothing? Congratulations, you're both spiritually bankrupt and financially ruined. Holidays may sound like a reprieve, but in medieval Europe they're solemn holy days, not carnivals. You don't feast and revel. You kneel through Mass, fast until you feel your bones hollow, confess every sin, even the ones you only thought about, and remind yourself that joy itself is a dangerous indulgence. Speak out against the church, and you risk being branded a heretic, flames at the stake, or worse, a witch, drowned at the river bank or flogged in the village square. So you mimic piety. You chant, you bow, and you pray that after enduring this dirt-soaked existence, your soul might finally ascend, provided the priest deigns to speak well of you. In the Middle Ages, God may be merciful. The Church? Not so much. If you think surviving peasant life is harsh, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, obedience, and total social invisibility. Female life is hard mode, with no health potions and no restart. From infancy, a girl's destiny is set: wed young, bear children, serve her husband, and die exhausted. Education? Only for noble daughters cloistered in convents. For most, learning ends with mastering the butter churn and mending your own tunic. Marriage arrives early. Betrothal at 12, motherhood by 14. It's not about love, it's about land, livestock, and forging alliances. Your opinion isn't requested. Once married, you become your husband's property. Your sole duties are to produce heirs, feed the clan, keep the household running, and never grumble. Complaints risk a witchcraft accusation and a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth itself is a deadly gamble. No prenatal care, no sterile instruments, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but minor complications often mean the death of mother, child, or both. And when the baby finally arrives, your workload doubles. Nursing a wailing infant in a lice-ridden hut, cooking, cleaning, and still rising with dawn to help in the fields. You're given no respite. You are the respite for everyone else. Unmarried women are viewed with suspicion, widows, with pity, and dangerous talk or herbal knowledge can land you a witch's verdict. Even within the church, your voice is muted. Nuns live under strict cloistered rules, ranked always below men. In short, a medieval woman endures, obeys, reproduces, and suffers in silence, ideally with a graceful smile. So far you've battled grime, hunger, and injustice, and maybe a goat. But just when you think the day can't worsen, violence arrives. Loud, bloody, and shockingly routine. The Middle Ages were no age of peace. Law and order hinged on the fickle temper of local lords. Crime is everywhere, homes, streets, churches, even at the communal bread oven, and punishments are brutal. Steal a loaf, lose a hand. Accused of lying, you might have your tongue pierced. Gossip too much, and you wear the scold's bridle, a metal mask with a bar locking your jaw shut. Accused of something graver, heresy, theft, or witchcraft, the stakes skyrocket. Trials are spectacles, sentences swift, and mercy nearly non-existent. In this world, surviving each sunrise is a fierce act of defiance, and every sunset brings the sobering reminder that tomorrow, the cycle of hardship, fear, and unrelenting expectation begins anew. How do you clear your name? By enduring excruciating pain, of course. Welcome to the trial by ordeal. In one gruesome variant, you plunge your arm into scalding water to retrieve a red-hot iron or a hidden pebble. If the burn scabs over cleanly in 3 days, you're declared innocent, if not guilty. Another cruel test casts you into the river, sink, and you're vindicated, though you likely drown, float, and you're condemned anyway. It's a grim medieval game show where the prize is your life, and the judges are rooting against you. Should judgment go against you, your execution becomes a spectacle. Villagers gather, some even picnic, around the gallows, torches, or scaffold. Hangings, beheadings, burnings at the stake, all part of the public entertainment. Meanwhile, hitting your spouse or children is perfectly acceptable. Domestic discipline is expected. Street brawls break out over the slightest insult, and nobody blinks if a nobleman's steed grazes your arm. A single look could earn you a beating. And beyond the village, war never truly ends. Feuding lords, territorial skirmishes, crusades. Someone is always marching off to slaughter in the name of honor, God, or sheer boredom. Violence isn't an aberration. It's the fabric of medieval society. You live knowing that a pig thief or a drunken neighbor could crush your skull in seconds. By now you've survived fleas, barbers' hooks, sleepless nights, and the constant threat of dismemberment. But your story's final chapter awaits, an early, unceremonious death. Reaching 40 is practically miraculous. Anyone beyond that age is called the Old One, more out of awe than respect. Average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, skewed downward by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children die before age 5 from disease, malnutrition, or one harsh winter. If you survive childhood, adulthood is no refuge. You begin labor as soon as you master walking. By 25, your joints creak like a monastery gate. You likely bear the battle scars of missing teeth, lost fingers, or broken bones. For women, childbirth is the great gamble. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. A midwife's prayer and a pot of hot water are the only comforts as you bleed out on a straw mattress. Some mothers survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive one. Men face their own perils, farming accidents with crude tools, infections from minor wounds, random acts of violence, or conscription into a doomed campaign. Even a trip to the market risks an ambush by bandits, or an overzealous tax collector. Death can also come invisibly from the plague, turning towns into mass graves, or from famine, laying waste to entire villages. Sometimes the final culprit is simply bad luck. Spoiled grain can induce terrifying fevers, delirium, and a scream-filled final night. If you're fortunate enough to receive funeral rites, it's brief and austere. Bodies are buried quickly to curb contagion. No embalming, no ornate coffin, just a shallow grave, whispered prayers, and a mound of earth marking your passing, provided there's room in the churchyard. Yes, medieval life is short, brutal, and hemmed in by death at every turn. There is no retirement, only the moment you stop rising with the dawn. So, reflect on your day. You awoke in grime, endured public humiliation, labored until your spine protested, scratched through wool that never stopped itching, prayed against plague, and narrowly escaped execution for something as trivial as owning a squirrel. In the Middle Ages, merely surviving to see another sunrise was the greatest triumph of all. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Dismiss that fairy tale vision of chivalric swordsmen, high-born ladies gazing from tower windows, grand banquets in candlelit halls, and heroic deeds. That polished myth of gallantry and glory is courtesy of storybooks. In reality, the medieval world was harsh, unforgiving, and built on rigid hierarchies. Born poor? You stayed poor. Born wealthy? You had a slim advantage, yet one bad pot of gruel could send you to your grave. Even nobles weren't spared misery. Their drafty stone keeps doubled as flea-infested chill boxes, where politically arranged marriages were more prison than privilege. Yes, they draped themselves in fur and sipped wine, but they also faced a 50% chance of dying from a skirmish, an infected splinter, or a sudden bout of dysentery. Every aspect of life was a relentless grind. Childbirth risked death. Chewing cost dental agony. Carving a loaf of bread meant negotiating with stale hardness that doubled as a weapon. Medieval existence was about survival, not leisure. And if you found a rare moment to dream of something better, there was no ladder to climb, no modern medicine, no distant travel, no internet to ponder that odd rash. You lived, labored, and perished within 10 miles of your birthplace. Yet, astonishingly, amid all that filth and fear, people still found laughter, song, and stories. They fell in love, forged friendships, and carved meaning from even the gloomiest days. Human spirit, it turns out, thrives on stubborn hope. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed, complete with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, spare a thought for your ancestors who wrestled with rats, famine, and feudal oppression so you wouldn't have to. They endured every horror so that one day, you could rest without dread. Long before she would be known as Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia and Reformer Extraordinaire, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she hailed from a minor German princely line whose Pomeranian duchy offered little power or prestige. But Sophie possessed a quality no title could grant: razor-sharp intellect, effortless charm, and an unquenchable hunger for greatness. Under her austere mother's watch and her distant Prussian officer father's stern eye, Sophie learned early the art of obedience married to cunning. She devoured books, mastered multiple tongues, and honed her ability to survey a room before uttering a word, skills that would become her arsenal in one of Europe's most treacherous courts. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia sought a bride for her nephew Peter, she looked abroad for someone pliable, a foreign princess grateful for a crown. Sophie was the perfect candidate: noble blood, Lutheran faith, to be forsaken, and a reputation for both grace and humility. At just 14, she was summoned to the icy grandeur of St. Petersburg. In 1744 she arrived, bundled in thin German silks, and wielding a diplomatic smile, a pawn in her mother's social chess game. Yet Sophie had her own strategy. To survive and thrive in Russia, she would burn her past behind her. Publicly, she renounced Lutheranism and embraced Orthodoxy, adopting the name Ekaterina Alexievna, Catherine, marking the irrevocable leap from German Duchess to Russian Grand Duchess. No one watching that delicate teenager in fur-trimmed robes could foresee the revolution, betrayals, and empire she would command. She was only beginning to learn that royal marriages were cages, not crowns. Her husband, Grand Duke Peter, heir to the throne, was no fairy tale prince. Awkward, immature, and more enamored with toy soldiers than governance or companionship, he regarded statecraft as play. The gilded corridors of the Russian court became her proving ground, where she navigated deadly intrigue with the same poise that once guided her through German convent halls. In those formative years, Catherine transformed courtly hardship into opportunity. While Peter languished in childish pursuits, she cultivated alliances, studied Russian politics, and dazzled the nobility with her wit and education. Her conversion ceremony was more than religious ritual. It was the moment she shed her old identity and embraced a destiny few girls of her station dared imagine. Each bow, each whispered compliment to powerful ministers, each secret discussion in candlelit corridors became a move toward sovereignty. And so, from the very outset of her Russian saga, Sophie, now Catherine, stopped being a mere princess and quietly began plotting her ascent to power. The path ahead would be paved with betrayal, enlightened reform, and a ruthless claim to the throne. But that, dear listener, is the story for another night. For now, rest assured, even in a world ruled by mud, blood, and unrelenting duty, a single spark of ambition could ignite an empire. Some chronicles even hint that Peter delayed consummating the marriage for years, more enthralled by the exploits of Frederick the Great than by his own bride. He longed for Prussia's disciplined courts and resented the cold grandeur of St. Petersburg. Catherine, however, embraced Russia with fierce conviction. She mastered the Russian tongue, pored over its tumultuous history, and memorized every liturgical gesture in the Orthodox ritual. She yearned to be more than an outsider's ornament. She wanted true belonging. Peter, by contrast, plotted escape, his heart never fully in the gilded prison of the court. This emotional gulf was also political. The Romanov court was a labyrinth of suspicion, where gossip slithered through corridors and power was won by the deftest intrigue. Though Empress Elizabeth still wielded absolute authority, her declining health made the succession inevitable, and everyone had schemed their own agenda. Catherine's correspondence was intercepted, her confidences betrayed by servants, and her allies watched as closely as her enemies. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. Yet Catherine was far from helpless. She learned the court's deadly game, quietly weaving alliances among military officers and cultivating friendships with scholars and diplomats. Her poise and measured restraint offered a stark counterpoint to Peter's petulant outbursts and his open disdain for Russian customs. In secret salons lit by candle and hushed by fear, she read Enlightenment philosophers, Voltaire and Montesquieu, dreaming not only of personal power but of a Russia guided by reason and learning. Still, time slipped away. As long as Peter lived, Catherine remained a consort without authority, a queen in waiting but never in power. So she observed, she listened, and she planned, confident that the crown would not be inherited but seized. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of patient maneuvering, Catherine detected her opening. Empress Elizabeth grew frail and passed from the throne, elevating Peter to Emperor Peter III. But Peter's reign unraveled at once. He alienated the Orthodox Church by mocking its ceremonies, enraged the nobility with ill-conceived edicts, and insulted the army by glorifying Prussia, Russia's traditional foe. He even spoke of divorcing Catherine to wed his mistress, a betrayal that chilled the court. Generals loyal to Catherine whispered discontent in barracks. Devout matrons muttered that he was no true czar but a puppet of foreign whims. As public support evaporated, Catherine acted with stunning precision. Surrounded by loyal officers and aided by sympathetic ministers, she orchestrated a bloodless coup. Peter was arrested, compelled to abdicate, and within days, Catherine ascended the throne as Empress of Russia. In that instant, Sophie, the once overlooked German Duchess, transformed herself into Catherine the Great, taking the reins of an empire she had meticulously prepared to govern. Catherine, observing every misstep, decided it was time to act. In July of that year, with Peter comfortably ensconced at his summer retreat, she executed a virtually bloodless coup. Backed by key officers, most notably her confidant Grigory Orlov and his influential brothers, she rode into St. Petersburg's heart-clad in resplendent regalia. Declared Empress Catherine II by acclamation, she secured the loyalty of the elite imperial guard. Peter, blindsided and isolated, capitulated within days. He was placed under arrest and, not long afterward, died under enigmatic conditions, officially of a hemorrhoidal colic, though whispers of foul play spread like wildfire. Now Empress not by lineage or marriage but by sheer resolve, cunning, and audacity, Catherine achieved something unprecedented. A foreign-born woman seized the Russian crown without drawing a sword. Yet her triumph was only the first act. The true test lay in converting that audacious seizure into an enduring reign. Would the fractured empire rally behind her? Could she earn the respect of a wary nobility, and avoid the fate that befell her husband? Catherine recognized that power secured through intrigue could slip away just as swiftly. She resolved to govern not as a schemer but as a visionary. Thus began her metamorphosis from covert conspirator to enlightened sovereign. She set out to redraw Russia's borders, champion the era's new rational ideas, and redefine the role of a female ruler. Crowned firmly in place, she did not rest on her laurels. Instead, she dreamed of a Russia transformed, not merely through military triumphs or political maneuvering, but via intellectual renewal. While Peter had idolized Frederick the Great and toyed with miniature armies, Catherine immersed herself in the writings of Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold philosophers of the Enlightenment. She embraced ideals of reason, progress, and public education, all while wielding absolute authority, determined to prove that a monarch could be both autocrat and servant of her people. Catherine didn't merely study Enlightenment thought, she embodied it. She maintained a rich correspondence with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him, while deftly justifying her absolute rule. She summoned Diderot to St. Petersburg, even quietly purchasing his entire library to ensure his independence. Behind palace doors, she pored over legal tomes, sparring with advisors over reforms and drafting blueprints to modernize her sprawling realm. Early in her reign, she launched a bold attempt to codify Russian law, convening a grand legislative commission in 1767 to rewrite the empire's archaic statutes. Her celebrated Instruction was both a political treatise and a clarion call for progress, declaring legal equality, denouncing torture, and insisting that sovereigns serve the common good. For an 18th-century Russian monarch, these were radical notions. Yet Catherine understood that lofty ideals had to survive the realities of feudal power. She moved with care, outlawing particularly cruel punishments, broadening secular schools, and erecting new libraries, while simultaneously affirming the nobility's hold over their serfs to secure their loyalty. She performed a delicate dance, showing herself a philosophic queen in the gilded salons of Europe and a pragmatic empress within the grim corridors of Moscow. Her vision wasn't to make Russia merely European, but to forge a modern state on her own terms, an iron will softened by a velvet glove. Not content to reform from within, she set her sights outward, determined to carve an empire that would command respect and fear across continents. If Peter the Great had cracked a window to the west, Catherine sought to raise the walls and fling Russia wide open. Under her leadership, Russia's borders swelled to unprecedented breadth. She waged successive wars with the Ottoman Empire, not merely to claim territory but to assert influence. Casting herself as liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, she marshaled generals like Suvorov and Potemkin to seize Crimea, secure the northern Black Sea coast, and at last grant Russia coveted warm-water ports, an ambition that had eluded Tsars for generations. Each conquest echoed like thunder across Europe, announcing that Russia was no backward cousin but a full-blown continental titan. Meanwhile, Catherine turned her gaze toward the west. Through deft diplomacy and secret agreements, she joined Austria and Prussia in the partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By 1795, after 3 carved-up partitions, Poland vanished from the map, and Russia absorbed millions of new subjects and vast tracts of fertile land. Yet her empire was built not only by armies but by architects and settlers. New cities rose on the steppes, trade arteries branched into once remote provinces, and German colonists were encouraged to till the soil, transforming the realm into a vibrant patchwork stretching from the frozen Baltic to the sun-baked shores of the Black Sea. Throughout it all, Catherine remained the architect of her destiny. With an insatiable appetite for knowledge, she reviewed dispatches at dawn, issued edicts by candlelight, and personally guided the shape of her ever-expanding domains. She proved that a sovereign could harness the lantern of reason to illuminate even the darkest corners of a vast empire, leaving a legacy not just of conquest or codified laws, but of an enlightened vision that reshaped the very essence of power. Critics decried her as grasping and imperialistic, yet for Catherine, expansion wasn't mere ambition, it was her destiny. A ruler's greatness, she insisted, was measured not only by enlightened principles but by the sweep of her realm's frontiers. She aspired not simply to govern Russia but to transform it into a civilization that its neighbors would revere, fear, and owe their allegiance to her alone. Still, for all her statesmanship, Catherine was equally famed for what transpired behind palace doors. Her personal life became the court's favorite topic, not confined to whispered library gossip. She surrounded herself with a rotating cast of lovers, handsome, often 2 or 3 decades her junior, and never a secret. These confidants were more than romantic dalliances. They were trusted partners in statecraft. Rewarded with titles, lands, and generous pensions for their loyalty, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes elevated further, if they ever overstepped. None loomed larger than Grigory Potemkin, brilliant, bold, and perhaps the only man in her world capable of matching her intellect. Their union blurred the lines between passion and policy. Some suggest they even wed in secret. Together they masterminded military campaigns, oversaw the colonization of southern territories, and envisioned new cities on the steppe. Potemkin was more than a suitor, he was her co-sovereign in all but name. Yet Europe thrived on scandal. Satirical pamphlets painted her as voracious and unhinged. After her death, defamatory myths grew ever more grotesque, none more infamous than the lurid, entirely baseless tales spread by her enemies to sully her reputation. Why such obsession? Because Catherine wielded power unapologetically. In an era when female rulers were expected to be sanctified icons or tragic puppets, she refused to play the role. She loved freely, ruled fiercely, and in doing so, was perceived as a threat. Ironically, she approached matters of the heart with philosophical rigor. Pleasure, she argued, was a natural right, and personal relationships need not undermine one's public duties. She mastered the art of separating affection from administration, a skill many male autocrats never achieved. Her liaisons were strategic alliances, each man chosen for competence and loyalty, released when no longer useful, with a gracious smile and generous pension. Rather than weaken her reign, these affairs fortified her network, blending erotic magnetism with political savvy to render her an unforgettable and formidable sovereign. But her rule faced its gravest challenge in 1773, when a bearded Cossack named Yemelian Pugachev emerged from the Don region. He claimed to be the deposed Peter III, alive, despite all accounts of his demise, and determined to unseat the German usurper. To the exhausted peasantry, his claim needed only the veneer of plausibility. It offered the promise of liberation. Pugachev vowed to abolish serfdom, slash taxes, and redistribute estates to common folk. His incendiary message swept through the Volga and Ural provinces, rallying Cossacks and old believers alike to a rebellion that threatened to tear Catherine's empire apart. Even a ruler as adept as she would now test her greatest skill, quelling insurrection while preserving the enlightened vision that defined her reign. The Pugachev uprising exploded into the largest peasant revolt Russia had ever seen. Villages were overrun, fortresses surrendered, and terrified nobles were put to the sword. For a gripping moment, it seemed as though the empire itself might splinter apart. Catherine felt the quake beneath her throne. This was no distant battlefield she could outmaneuver with cavalry charges and diplomatic treaties. This rebellion came from the very people she ruled. Yet she refused to falter. Rather than waste time in panic, she deployed her most seasoned regiments with ruthless efficiency. By 1774, Pugachev's ragged host lay in ruins. Captured, he was displayed in an iron cage as a grim spectacle, then led to Moscow's public square and executed, his head severed as a stark admonition to all who dared rise. In the rebellion's wake, Catherine cast aside any lingering dream of emancipating the serfs. The flames of revolt had shown her the fragile limits of Enlightenment ideals in a land still shackled by centuries-old feudal bonds. She turned all her weight behind the nobility, trading them absolute authority over their peasants for unwavering loyalty to the crown. Thus began a decisive pivot. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now placed order above philosophy. Her reforms became tempered, surveillance intensified, and any murmur of dissent was stamped out before it found breath. Pugachev's severed head may have fallen to the scaffold, but his warning lingered in Catherine's mind. An empire built on inequality risks collapse when the storm finally breaks. By the final years of her reign, over 3 decades after her audacious ascent, Catherine had shattered every expectation. She held power longer than any woman before her in Russia's annals. Under her watch, the realm swelled by more than 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, significant swaths of Poland, and the warm water coasts of the Black Sea. These were not mere territorial gains but strategic masterstrokes that secured vital ports and rewrote Europe's geopolitical map. Her impact extended far beyond borders. Deeply cultured, she founded the Hermitage Museum, amassing one of Europe's most dazzling art collections, and kept up spirited correspondence with the era's greatest thinkers. St. Petersburg's salons became hubs of literary and philosophical debate, lifting Russia's cultural prestige from pariah to peer. She championed education, establishing schools for girls, endorsing the printing press, and even personifying scientific courage by receiving smallpox inoculation before her court. Yet her legacy was laced with contradictions. Despite her reformist zeal, she never liberated the serfs. In fact, she tightened their bonds across new territories. Her top-down modernization polished imperial institutions but left the bedrock of feudalism intact. Still, she delivered stability and vision, demonstrating that power was never a birthright but a craft honed through relentless will, shrewd calculation, and political acumen. Contemporaries labeled her tyrant, seductress, reformer, and villain, yet above all, they conceded her effectiveness. When she drew her final breath in 1796, Russia stood wealthier, larger, and stronger than it had in centuries. The throne was secure, the empire vast, and her legend already epic. Catherine did more than reign. She seized history itself, shaping it with intellect and iron resolve until she transcended the title of empress and entered the realm of myth. Despite never being born Russian, never inheriting her crown, and always defying a world unkind to female power, she not only survived but soared, carving her name indelibly into the annals of time. Catherine refused to exist merely as ornament. From dawn until dusk she pored over books, filled journals with her own reflections, and devoured every scrap of knowledge she could find. Her days were a whirlwind of statecraft, studying dispatches from across Europe, drafting replies to foreign diplomats, sharpening decrees, and navigating the ceaseless intrigues of rival courtiers. She did not settle into the throne, she operated it like the consummate stateswoman she was. Yet power came with solitude. Surrounded by admirers, advisers, and artists, she confessed in her memoirs that genuine trust was rare. Her son Paul, kept at arm's length from affairs of state, grew into a figure she feared might undo her life's work. And when her great partner in both politics and passion, Grigory Potemkin, fell dangerously ill in 1791, his eventual death carved a wound in her heart from which she never fully healed. Ever conscious of her image, Catherine mastered the art of narrative. She presented herself as mother of the nation, illuminated despot, defender of the realm, and patroness of the arts. Behind those roles stood a woman forged by betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, yet resolutely undeterred. When she passed in 1796, Russia had been irrevocably transformed, but historians would always ask, could she have freed the serfs? Had her enlightenment zeal been compromised by political necessity? Was she above all a reformer or a ruler first? She earned the epithet, the Great, not because she was flawless, but because she seized power on her own terms in an age that denied women any right to rule. She didn't simply don the crown, she rewrote what it meant to deserve one. Deep in the lush Chiapas jungle of southern Mexico, the long silent ruins of Palenque whisper secrets of an era lost to time. Towering stone temples push through verdant foliage, their weathered reliefs hinting at vanished splendor. In 1994, a team led by archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez made a discovery that would stir those stones from their slumber. Adjacent to the famed Temple of the Inscriptions, resting place of King Pacal, Temple 13 revealed a hidden chamber sealed for centuries. Inside lay a limestone sarcophagus undisturbed by looters, its lid carved with geometric patterns. As the archaeologists lifted it, a swirl of crimson dust rose on the stale air. Powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury ore used in sacred Maya rituals. Within that scarlet haze rested the skeleton of a woman, her bones remarkably intact, her face clad in a finely carved jade mask that caught the low light in emerald gleams. Around her lay offerings of jade and shell, ornate necklaces, diadems, and ear spools, all signs of royalty. Yet no glyphs named her, and no inscriptions spoke of her deeds. She was simply the Red Queen. Despite modern forensics, her identity remains a mystery. Carbon dating placed her death in the 7th century, during Palenque's golden age. Unlike many Maya burials plundered by time and greed, hers was a deliberate sanctum, isolated, unbroken, and charged with ritual significance. Her red cloak of cinnabar spoke volumes. She was to be remembered not in words, but through the vivid ritual of her burial and the enigma she left behind. The most haunting legacy of the Red Queen's tomb is not her jewels or the hushed chamber, but that scarlet dust, echoing through millennia, a silent testament to a life once crowned in mystery. A thick veil of powdered cinnabar draped every surface, the sarcophagus, the chamber walls, her bones, even the offerings encircling her. It clung like blood seeping into stone. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar, ground from mercury sulfide, was among the most sacred, and perilous, materials in the ancient world. Its fierce red hue was more than eye-catching. It embodied the essence of blood, the cycle of death and rebirth, and the life force that bridged human and divine realms. Red was holy, sunrise's promise, the color of sacrificial rites, and the spark of life springing from the void. But beyond symbolism lay spirituality. Enrobing the deceased in cinnabar wasn't about preservation for eternity but preparation for transformation. In Maya cosmology, death was not an end but a passage into deeper layers of the cosmos. Thus, the woman we call the Red Queen was not simply interred, she was consecrated for deification. Yet cinnabar carried its own peril. Its toxicity could induce tremors, hallucinations, or even death. The Maya, unaware of its chemical dangers, nonetheless revered its potency. To shroud a corpse in this substance was to declare the departed no ordinary mortal. At Palenque, only a select few received this honor. King Pacal himself, whose pyramid dominates the site, also lay buried in a cinnabar womb. That shared ritual sparked endless debate. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or another figure of equal divine status? Her skull rested on a layer of jaguar pelt, another emblem of sacred power, while nearby lay bone awls, obsidian blades, and petite jade figurines, tokens of rites performed in life or mortuary feast. Every element of her burial told a wordless tale, a story of power cloaked in ritual, of a woman poised to traverse the underworld with ceremony, drenched in the hue of sacrifice. Encircling the Red Queen's cinnabar-stained remains was stillness broken only by the shine of jade, shell, and obsidian. These weren't mere adornments but vital companions for her soul's journey through Xibalba, the Maya afterlife. Heavy jade necklaces lay by her chest, their polished surfaces still radiant after centuries underground. Jade wasn't simply beautiful. It was a symbol of eternity, green like maize, vibrant as the jungle, the very breath of the gods. Only the elite were interred with this stone, and for the Red Queen, it clasped her wrists and ears, a testament to her earthly influence and possible divine favor. The most haunting relic was the mosaic jade mask that cloaked her face. Unlike Egypt's golden funerary masks, this one was subtle, crafted from scores of tiny tesserae that followed the contours of her skull. It served not only to preserve her identity but to present her visage as divine before the gods. Scattered around her remains, bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell objects hinted at sacred roles: priestess, healer, matriarch, held in life or conferred in death. One bone pin bore a faint, deliberate engraving, a whisper of her voice echoing through time. Along the tomb's perimeter, ceramic vessels lay sealed, likely once brimming with food, drink, or incense to sustain her spirit beyond the threshold of mortality. For the Maya, the afterlife was an arduous voyage through layered realms. These items were not luxuries but necessities, provisions for the soul's perilous passage. In its intimate restraint, the tomb felt purposeful, not ostentatious. There were no chariots or piles of gold, just carefully chosen treasures inscribed with spiritual weight. It was a roadmap for the departed, a testament to how the Maya perceived death, not as finality, but as a transfer of power. Through these offerings, we glimpse a world where transition, not conclusion, defined the journey beyond life. The Red Queen wasn't interred to fade into oblivion. She was being readied for ascension. Yet, despite the tomb's lavish pageantry, one void remained hauntingly evident. No name, no inscriptions graced her sarcophagus, no glyphs decorated the walls to declare her identity. Clearly she was someone of profound standing, but who? From the moment archaeologists broke the seal, scholars raced to unravel her mystery. The most persuasive argument holds that she was Ninewak Chisik, the wife of Kinich Pakel, known today as Pakel the Great, Palenque's illustrious king. Born into high nobility, and wed young into Palenque's ruling dynasty, she bore at least 3 sons who each rose to prominence, and she fulfilled vital ceremonial duties alongside her husband's reign. The tomb's proximity, just steps from Pakel's own grand sepulchre in the Temple of the Inscriptions, suggests an intentional pairing of sovereign spouses even in death. And only 2 burials in Palenque featured such an overwhelming pall of cinnabar, Pakel's and the Red Queen's. The coincidence seems too pointed to ignore. Yet DNA analysis yielded no definitive maternal link between the 2 sets of remains. That said, marriage does not require shared blood, and some experts propose she might instead have been Ninesak Kuk, Pakel's mother and regent, who ruled Palenque until her son came of age. Others argue she could have been a high priestess or a royal ancestor lost in the erosion of history. Still, the evidence leans strongest toward her being Ninewak Chisik, a queen by title, mother of kings, and spiritual consort to Pakal. Perhaps her namelessness was deliberate. In Maya thought, a soul's immortality was not bound to carved epithets but to the enduring ritual, the power of symbol, and the whispering of earth and stone. Thus, the Red Queen lingers between myth and reality, a woman of authority remembered not in words, but in scarlet dust and sacred silence. To grasp who she was, we must first understand the world she inhabited. Maya royal women wielded far more sway than many outsiders realize. Politics was a family affair, and royal women were not mere consorts but diplomats, priestesses, and key brokers of power. They presided over rituals, commissioned temples, and upheld the legitimacy of dynasties. Their bloodlines served as political currency, forging alliances and cementing claims to the throne. Consider Isaac Cook, Pakal the Great's mother. When Palenque's throne stood vacant, she assumed the regency and ruled with full authority until her son reached maturity. She was no placeholder. She issued decrees, oversaw monumental construction, and maintained the city's stability. Without her stewardship, Pakal might never have ascended at all. And she was far from unique. Throughout Maya civilization, royal women repeatedly demonstrated that true sovereignty often flowed through their veins as strongly as through any king's. In this light, the Red Queen's anonymity becomes her greatest testament, her story preserved not by names etched in stone but by the vibrant rituals that surrounded her passage into the next realm. In death, as in life, she remained a figure of transcendent power, her legend written in the timeless language of ritual and red dust. Across the Maya realm, from Yaxcalan to Naranjo, from Calakmul to Copan, stone stele and temple murals bear witness to women of extraordinary rank. Here, royal consorts and queen mothers officiated grand rituals, negotiated alliances and war councils, and on occasion wielded sovereign authority in their own right. Carved images show them garbed in resplendent headdresses and flowing mantles, standing shoulder to shoulder with kings, or towering above them, issuing decrees whose glyphs once rang out across plazas and causeways. Their names were etched in history until the Spanish conquest draped a colonial veil over indigenous memory, relegating these powerful figures to silence. But the stones speak on, in a society where power was negotiated and kinship formed the backbone of political life. Maya women could command armies, consecrate temples, and anchor dynasties. Within this tapestry, the Red Queen's sepulchre takes on fresh brilliance. She was not a mere adjunct to male rule but a linchpin of royal legitimacy, her cinnabar-stained bones echoing the fierce ritual of her husband's own burial. The jade mosaic mask upon her skull was no mere ornament. It was a testament to her enduring identity, a vessel through which her visage could speak for eternity. Her bloodline may well have been the glue that bound Palenque's dynasty together, linking generations through sacred lineage rather than carved name. Her tomb was far more than a grave, it was a cosmogonic threshold. Nestled deep inside Temple 13, one of Palenque's more modest pyramids, its location beside the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions was no accident. Maya architects aligned these monuments according to celestial cycles, mythic precedent, and dynastic memoria. Temple Xi's unassuming facade belies the intimacy within, a precipitous stairway descending into darkness, leading to a chamber hewn of limestone blocks and sealed for well over a millennium. No lavish murals adorn these walls, no glyphic narrative recounts her deeds. Instead, the silence speaks volumes. This is hallowed ground not for the living to interpret, but for the departed to transform. At the heart of the chamber lies her sarcophagus, an altar of polished stone, echoing Pakel's own cosmic coffin next door. Where Pakel's lid bursts with carved imagery of resurrection, the Red Queen's sepulchre turns inward, focusing on the ritual of death itself. Every corner of that platform is smothered in cinnabar, the toxic red powder that clings like sacrificial blood. To the Maya, it was the pigment of rebirth and divine power, dangerous to handle, revered for its potency, and reserved for the most august burials. Only a king and his spiritual counterpart wore this mantle of scarlet. Around her, offerings lay in precise arrangement, jade ears, pools, and necklaces heavy with the promise of eternal life, bone needles and obsidian blades suggestive of auto-sacrifice ceremonies, either practiced by her in life or reenacted at her interment to infuse her spirit with sacred potency. Ceramic vessels, their lips still sealed, likely held copal incense, maize dough, or the sacred balch wine, provisions for the soul's perilous voyage through Xibalba, the underworld's labyrinthine courts and rivers of judgment. The tomb's east-west axis mirrors the sun's daily arc, symbolic of the soul's passage from mortal dawn to the twilight of eternity. Here, death is not an end but a rite of passage, a carefully choreographed journey through visible architecture and steeped ritual, guided by myth and the precision of priests who choreographed each gesture to ensure her safe transit. In that hush, cut through only by the soft glint of jade and shell, we perceive the Maya view of mortality, not as final annihilation, but as transformation, an ascent into successive cosmic layers. The Red Queen's final home was crafted to propel her beyond the earthly realm. Her bones rest entombed in stone, her essence daubed in cinnabar's scarlet flame, and her legacy etched not in endless cartouches but in the very design of her sanctuary. In that silent chamber, her story endures, a queen unnamed yet never voiceless, a sovereign cloaked in ritual, poised forever on the threshold between life and legend. In Maya cosmology, the visage was sacred, a reflection of the soul that the gods themselves must recognize. Around her lay ceramic vessels once brimming with cacao elixir, maize gruel, water, or pulque, sustenance for her passage into the next realm. Nearby, stingray spines and conch shell trumpets lay poised, perhaps to pierce the silence of the underworld, to announce her arrival before the deity courts, or to serve as ritual implements guiding her spirit. Burial for the Maya was never a farewell but a metamorphosis, death as seed, interment as planting, and the afterlife as budding anew. Monarchs were viewed as earthly avatars of divine forces. In death, they returned to those celestial origins. So the Red Queen, swathed in the blood-red powder of cinnabar, entombed beneath a pyramidal cone, and encircled by offerings, was poised not as a mortal but as a nascent deity within the cosmic order. Her interment marked the opening chapter of her legend, set just steps from the famed tomb of Kinich-Jana Pakel, Pakel the Great, interred in the grand temple of the inscriptions. Pakel's sepulchre is celebrated for its elaborate carvings and weighty symbolism, yet the Red Queen's sanctuary is equally revelatory for what its location declares. Temple 13, modest beside its towering neighbor, conceals this intimate crypt, a steep, narrow stairway plunging into darkness, its silence unbroken for over 11 centuries. In Palenque, temples were laid out according to astral patterns and dynastic myth. Her closeness to Pakel's pyramid was no accident, but a deliberate statement in stone. Most scholars now favor the identification of the Red Queen as Nine-Wak Chisik, Pekel's queen and trusted consort. Though her burial bears no carved name, its echoes with Pekel's own rites, both cloaked in cinnabar, both adorned in jade, both treated with profound reverence, speak of a dual narrative. Pekel's sarcophagus lid depicts his descent through the cosmic world tree, a dramatic tableau of death and rebirth. The Red Queen's chamber is quieter, its power internal, focused on the ritual of transition itself. Yet subtle architecture whispers meaning. Her sarcophagus aligns east to west, mirroring the sun's daily voyage across the sky. If Pekel symbolized the sun's passage through night, destined to rise again, then she may have embodied the moon, its gentle glow guiding the dark, feminine counterpart in the heavens. Side by side in death, they present a divine duality, king and queen, sun and moon, active force and reflective calm. In Maya thought, rulership thrived on balance, not singular rule. The cosmos, like the court, needed equilibrium between masculine and feminine, between ruler and ritually prepared consort. By burying the Red Queen beside Pekel, the Maya enshrined more than a royal marriage. They sealed a partnership essential to the universe's harmony. In that silent chamber, two souls rest wrapped in cinnabar and stone, their legacies intertwined for all eternity. One of history's most profound silences surrounds her final resting place. Though her name has vanished into the mists of time, the Red Queen of Palenque survives not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the ancient world's most enigmatic and powerful women. Sealed away for over 13 centuries, her tomb now murmurs through the ages, its unanswered questions growing louder with every new find. No carved glyph proclaims who she was. No stele recounts her deeds. Yet the exquisite care of her burial, the lavish gifts at her feet, the sacred cinnabar cloaking her bones, the jade mask that once mirrored her soul, all speak to a woman of profound authority, not merely a king's consort, but a sovereign presence in her own right. Today, the Red Queen compels us to rethink long-held assumptions. She reminds us that in Maya civilization, women did not stand silent in the shadows of power. They led ceremonies, directed diplomacy, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Pekel have long captured our gaze, her rediscovery asserts that rulership did not belong solely to men. It coursed through the veins of queens, priestesses, mothers, and visionaries. Her legacy transcends the treasures she left behind. It lies in the conversation she ignites among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every glimmering jade bead, every scarlet layer of cinnabar, every architectural choice in Temple 13 reveals deliberate design. This woman mattered, and perhaps that is the most remarkable part of her story, not what we now know, but what remains hidden. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not a static ledger of facts but a living puzzle, a shared human yearning to bridge past and present. In that spirit, her story continues to unfold. Wrapped in the color of life and sacrifice, her jade-shrouded visage now greets us through science, art, and wonder. Nameless, yet never voiceless, mysterious, yet unforgettable, the Red Queen ruled in life and in death, reigns over our collective imagination. Frida was always drawn to upheaval, to ideas that upended convention. Yet long before the 1925 bus accident that would reshape her body, and long before fame would define her name, Frida Kahlo was already carving herself into the world with jagged strokes, fearless opinions, and an identity far too large to fit anyone else's expectations. Growing up in Coacan, She was preparing for a metamorphosis that would begin in earnest one autumn afternoon. On September 17, 1925, the life Frida had known cleaved in two. That day she climbed aboard a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, laughter still dancing on their lips. Minutes later, a streetcar bore down on them. Wood shattered, metal buckled, and Frida was impaled by an iron handrail that drove into her left hip and emerged through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places, her right leg lay in splinters, her collarbone and ribs snapped, and her right foot dislocated. At just 18, her body became a battlefield of bone and steel. Passers-by pulled her from the wreckage, draping her in a borrowed coat. Amid the chaos, someone noticed her form dusted not with blood but with gold powder, glittering ash from a pouch she had been carrying. Rushed to the Red Cross hospital, she endured a litany of surgeries, each one a crucible of pain and uncertainty. For weeks she lay immobilized in a full-body cast, racked by infection and fear, her dream of becoming a doctor slipping through her fingers with every gasping breath. Yet from that enforced stillness sprang a new beginning. Her father brought brushes. Her mother rigged an easel above her bed. A mirror hung from the canopy so she could study her reflection. In plaster and agony, Frida began to paint. What started as a distraction matured into an obsession. Her first subjects were her own eyes, because they were all she had. But the mirror's gaze birthed something more than vanity. It was survival. The crash had shattered her body, but it opened a doorway into her psyche, into a language of pain and selfhood that only painting could express. The girl who once dreamed of healing others now embarked on healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. As Frida Kahlo lay encased in steel and plaster, she painted. Her canvases did not bloom with pretty flowers or tranquil vistas. They throbbed with her suffering, physical, emotional, and existential. She painted herself impaled by nails like a modern-day martyr, floating in barren landscapes tethered to fractured columns, metaphors for her broken spine. She painted tears, fractures, dismemberment, and yet always she gazed back at us, never a passive victim but a defiant witness to her own story. Her self-portraits were more than confessions. They were radical reclamations of her body and identity in a world determined to define her. Drawing on Mexican retablo traditions, devotional panels depicting miracles and martyrdom, she turned the genre inward. Her body became the altar, her wounds the sacred site. In one work, she shows herself bleeding from a broken neck, a surgical scar rendered in vivid, surreal detail. In another, her torso is split open, revealing a miniature Frida holding herself together. Each image fused folk motifs, medical diagrams, and dreamlike allegory into a visual autobiography that transcended mere portraiture. Through color, culture, and myth, Frida invented a new visual vernacular, one that spoke of personal trauma and national identity, of feminine strength and artistic freedom. She wrote her own narrative in pigment and plaster, refusing to be defined by her injuries or by anyone else's story. In doing so, she became not just an artist, but a revolution unto herself, forever painting her way back from the brink into the uncharted realm of human resilience. By the time Frida could walk again, each step a reminder of her broken body, she had shed the ambitions of a future physician. In her place stood an artist whose vision shattered every expectation. She had alchemized her greatest wound into the catalyst for creation. Frida Kahlo didn't simply depict her agony. She demanded the world confront it, transforming suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still confined by caste yet already wielding brushes like weapons, the 21-year-old Kahlo encountered Diego Rivera, Mexico's celebrated muralist and a titan of social realism. 20 years her senior and towering in both stature and reputation, Rivera painted grand narratives of Mexican life on city walls. Frida, barefoot in her hospital bed, carried her canvases to him at the Ministry of Education and asked, without preamble, "Do I have talent?" Rivera studied her work, saw her unvarnished voice, raw, ironic, beautiful, and replied, "Yes, not merely out of kindness." Thus began their tempestuous union, a collision that Frida would later liken to a second accident in her life. They married in 1929, an unlikely duo, Diego, the colossal revolutionary, and Frida, the fragile rebel hobbling on a cane. Their bond was both creative crucible and emotional battleground. Rivera nurtured her artistry even as he betrayed her with indiscretions, infamously with her sister, Cristina. Frida suffered, fought back with affairs of her own. Rumors entwine her with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe, and they divorced in 1939, only to remarry in 1940 on terms of autonomy. Frida kept her home, her finances, her name. Their second marriage was less a romance than a pact, two kindred spirits willing to sacrifice harmony for the sake of art. In the 1930s, Frida followed Rivera on his commissions across the United States, San Francisco's murals, Detroit's industrial frescoes, New York's Rockefeller Center, until his work was dismantled. Exposed to American capitalism in the depth of the Great Depression, she became an even fiercer Mexican nationalist and ardent communist. The gleam of American opulence, set against mass suffering, only galvanized her critique of materialism and deepened her devotion to her homeland's indigenous roots. While Rivera wielded his brushes to paint public spectacles, Frida turned inward, creating intimate revolutions on small tin panels and canvas. Her signature style coalesced in this era, surreal, incisive, and deeply personal. She painted self-portraits not as acts of vanity but as tools of survival. Her body, once impaled, dissected, and scarred, became the terrain of her art. In one canvas, nails pierce her skin in a modern martyrdom. In another, she floats tethered to a broken column representing her shattered spine. Every image revealed a fractured self, yet always she gazed directly at the viewer, unflinching, asserting her agency. Her most searing work from this period is the Henry Ford Hospital. Frida lies bleeding on a metal bed, tears staining her cheeks, surrounded by floating icons of loss, a fetus, a snail, surgical instruments, a fractured pelvis. It is visceral, unrelenting, and suffused with the brutal honesty that defined her oeuvre. In each stroke, she reclaimed her body and her narrative, forging a new language that melded Mexican folk motifs, surrealist imagery, medical illustration, and myth. Through paint, she healed, resisted, and asserted that her identity, frail yet unbowed, would be her greatest masterpiece. Back in Mexico, Frida dove headfirst into leftist politics. She and Diego opened their home to Leon Trotsky during his exile, sheltering him among Coyoacan's tropical gardens. Frida's daily attire, vibrant Tehuana dresses woven with indigenous patterns, was more than costume. It was a declaration of cultural pride and political solidarity. Her canvases never drifted from her convictions, her body, her heritage, and her radical ideals fused seamlessly in every brushstroke. While Rivera painted sweeping murals of workers and revolution, Frida painted its human toll, the fractured flesh, the smoldering psyche, the silent witness in her own gaze. Returning to Mexico in the late 1930s, she had shed the label Diego Rivera's wife. She was now a force unto herself, an artist whose work pulsed with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and a fierce sense of Mexican identity. Her Casa Azul became a living manifesto, cobalt walls edged in sunny yellow, Aztec sculptures in the courtyard, monkeys and parrots gliding through open windows. Inside, pre-Columbian artifacts shared space with folk art and radical pamphlets. Copal incense mingled with the strum of mariachi in the street. This was Frida's crucible of creativity. Her paintings grew richer and more complex, threading personal narrative with national drama. In the two Fridas, she split herself in half, one in European lace with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous finery, stoic and anchored by tradition, her visual autobiography of love, loss, and lineage. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris, earning praise from Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky. The surrealists courted her, but she rebuffed their label. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." And that reality was Mexico incarnate, not the picturesque postcard, but the vibrant, wounded country she adored. Hummingbirds dripped with blood, skeletons danced in cornfields, hearts and thorns wove through her imagery, honoring indigenous roots while unmasking the violences of past and present. Even as her artistic voice soared, her body betrayed her. Dozens of surgeries, chronic infections, and unrelenting pain became her constant companion. Yet she refused to be sidelined. Propped up on cushions, torso bound in corsets, she gripped her brush with a warrior's determination, painting canvases that were both release and defiance. By the 1940s, her spine was crumbling, her right leg a source of endless agony. A lifetime's worth of operations left her sometimes confined to bed or stretched in traction. But still she painted, with greater intensity, her images darker, her defiance sharper. In the broken column, she splits down the middle, nails piercing her flesh, an ionic column supplanting her spine, and still her eyes burn with unflinching resolve. Pain was no longer just her subject, it was her co-author, sculpting every line and color. Her politics marched in lockstep. A loyal member of the Mexican Communist Party, she penned fiery manifestos, joined demonstrations, and blasted imperialism at every turn. When she could no longer stand, she rolled her wheelchair into the streets, placard aloft, voice rising above the crowd, her art and her activism inseparable until the end. In 1953, Frida finally received the solo exhibition she'd waited decades for, a long-overdue celebration of her art in Mexico City. Yet her body was too frail to stand. Doctors forbade her attendance. So Frida did exactly what only she could do. She arrived by ambulance, carried on a stretcher into the gallery, and positioned herself at the center of the room on her hospital bed. Draped in her finest Tehuana gown and surrounded by her own canvases, she welcomed guests with tequila shots, a mischievous laugh, and that fierce spark in her eyes that had never dimmed. Her final works carried the dual spirit of childlike wonder and unsparing truth. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she portrays herself encased in a steel corset, cradled by the hands of comrades tearing away the shackles of oppression. Her last known canvas, a simple still life of sliced watermelons, bore the inscription, Viva la vida! A jubilant salute to life itself. Even as she stared down death, she remained defiant, joyful, and ever the political artist. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo drew her final breath in the very house where she was born. Officially, a pulmonary embolism claimed her life, but those closest whispered of a deeper exhaustion, the relentless surgeries, unending pain, and her lifetime's battle with her own body. Just days earlier, she had insisted on rolling her wheelchair to a demonstration protesting a CIA-backed coup in Guatemala, fist raised defiantly in the humid air. Revolution, she once said, was her final heartbeat. Her funeral at the Palacio de Bellas Artes drew an outpouring of grief and respect. Draped in the crimson banner of the Mexican Communist Party, her coffin rested beneath a ceiling of stained glass, watched over by fellow artists, activists, and the thousands who adored her. Diego Rivera wept openly, calling her the greatest love of his life, a poignant testament to their turbulent bond. In death, Frida refused to fade. Initially, her name circulated in hushed tones among art circles, too raw for surrealists, too unorthodox for traditionalists. But as feminist scholars and cultural critics began excavating overlooked voices in the 1970s and 80s, her legacy roared back to life. She became more than a painter. She was a testament to pain transformed into beauty, a beacon of feminist resistance, a celebration of Mexican identity unfettered by colonial gaze, and an icon for queer and disabled communities. Her trademark unibrow, her elaborate floral headdresses, and the vibrant halls of Casa Azul entered the global imagination. Today, her childhood home is a shrine, her journals, a sacred text, and her paintings command reverence in the world's greatest museums. Frida Kahlo spent much of her life standing in Diego's shadow, but in death she stepped into the light she had always owned. She turned suffering into creation, solitude into solidarity, and a personal struggle into a universal cry for authenticity. And in doing so, she immortalized herself not merely as an artist of extraordinary talent, but as the living embodiment of resilience, rebellion, and boundless creativity. She left more than paintings behind. She left a mirror, and dared us to peer into it, not with pity or fear, but with passion. Today, Frida Kahlo's visage is ubiquitous, splashed on t-shirts, towering on street murals, molded into dolls, looped through memes, plastered on posters. Her signature unibrow, the halo of blooms in her hair, and that unwavering gaze are instantly recognizable. But her true legacy isn't merely her image, it's the authenticity it embodies. Frida never strove for perfection. She refused to fit neatly into any category. Unconventional by choice, she embraced her differences, her disability, her bisexuality, her fiery politics, her proud Mexican heritage, and wove them into art that spoke across cultures and generations. In a world that prizes flawlessness, she offered up rawness, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, paradoxically whole in her contradictions. She has become more than an artist. She is a global emblem of resistance, feminism, and cultural pride. To queer communities, she stands as a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly in an era that demanded silence. To women everywhere, she is proof that power needs no permission. To disabled creators, she shows that suffering can fuel creativity rather than extinguish it. And to Mexico, she remains a reclaimed daughter, bold, folkloric, and woven into the very fabric of the nation's soul. Once dismissed as too confessional or too surreal, her self-portraits are now treasured worldwide. The two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, the broken column. These works do more than invite a glance. They make us feel the ache of heartbreak and the burning of resilience. Frida lived on the margins, and made them her stage. She thrived on contradiction, a communist who adorned herself in gold, a woman betrayed yet willing to love again, a body shattered but a spirit unbreakable. All the while, she painted with unwavering conviction. Frida Kahlo never set out to become an icon, she simply told her own story with fearless honesty. In doing so, she spoke for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in great art. Now, when we see her face, we see courage. We see color. We see survival, and we see Frida, not as one who has vanished, but as one who lives on, immortal.